So I think I'll start. And I want to welcome all of you to the 13th annual Sconset History Night. While we had to skip 2020 because of COVID, we did have, I think, an excellent program last year on the Beach House. Karen Crooks was the speaker, and I know she's back there this evening. Great job last year, Karen. So here we go. Okay, so up there you can see who the presenters are, Bob, Rick, and Rob. And you all know Rob, and that's Rick, our wonderful tour guide from Sconset over there. And I guess that leaves me, I'm Bob. So we're going to do a little bit of a historical overview. I kind of calculated my hours in research, and I think I got up to 40 hours. And I have enough information to do a dissertation, and I would like to read it to you tonight. No. But the good news is that every time we do a Sconset History Night, we collect all of our notes, our narratives, all of the slides we use, we put them in a binder, and we give them to the NHA research library, so that anybody who goes in there in the future will know that they don't have to do a history night on. Come on, what's tonight? Thank you. So there'll be copious notes there, and the research library, which is on Fair Street, is an excellent place to go to find out information about history, whether it's a neighborhood, house histories, which often are produced by the Nantucket Preservation Trust. And Amelia Holmes is here, who is the director. Where are you, Amelia? Maybe she went, oh, there you are. So I bug her every summer in July before we come out here and speak to you. So if you remember where that beach house was, you just take a walk up going north on Ocean Avenue, and when you get to the footpath, the footbridge, you go down the steps, and then you travel down Gully Road, which has had other names in time, but we know it as Gully Road, and you are basically in Codfish Park. So Rob, you're just going to flip through slides intuitively as I talk, and we'll see what happens. Oh, look at that. Is that that's, and I tried to date a lot of these. This is from 1882, and there have been some various renditions of that footbridge across the gully, but it was the only way to get from Ocean Avenue over to the village at one point, other than going through the hotel property, the Ocean View Hotel. Can you all hear me all right? Yes. Good. Okay, let's move on. This is a lovely view from a famous aerial photograph taken in either 1926 or 27. And we tried to focus in on Codfish Park. And it's quite interesting to see what the village of Sconset looked like back then. You can see the casino in the middle with a white roof, and you can see the tennis courts. And you can see that bank that's about 30 feet that runs down to what we now know as Codfish Park. Codfish Park, the name, it's hard to pinpoint the exact date when it came into use, but the first time it was referred to in the Ink and M was in 2008, when a gentleman bought a particular cottage down there in Codfish Park. So there are many years, yes. Did I? Well, let's go back to 1908, okay? It appears that Rob is the only one listening. It's not the first time you've done that to me. Give 100 years here or there. Okay, 1908, right. And what you can see in this picture are the three gullies. Actually, tonight I learned that there's a fourth gully, but I'll tell you about the three gullies. South Gully, which is the road, which is Gully Road now that you go under the footbridge. And then you have, oh, thank you for the pointer, Middle Gully, which is that slanted access, and actually that is currently defined as emergency access to Codfish Park in the event that high tides, pardon me?
They can get a fire engine up there.
Wait to start if you want to.
They tried to get a fire engine up there and they succeeded. It's got a lot of Nantucket pinstripes on the side. It's a very narrow road for any of you that haven't seen it. It's quite narrow and it's a steep road. And then at the north end we have the North Gully, of course, and at the bottom of that is Hairpin Turn. We'll see some images of that. And tonight I learned that there's another gully, and that gully is called?
Eldridge's Gully.
And you want to tell me about it?
My grandmother and grandfather had a house right at the very bottom, and when they wanted to have Codfish Park Road tie into Bank Street, the house was torn down at the end of World War II.
The house was in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
Yep. So remember that, Eldridge Gully. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So here's an early image from 2022. No, wait a minute. 1881, bird's eye view. And actually the gullies are quite clear in this image. It's actually a historical view of what things look like. And I'll tell you in a little bit about the fact, no, I'll tell you now. Codfish Park actually didn't exist for 60 or 70 years in the 1800s, the early 1800s into the mid 1800s. It was beachfront. Before that, it was a place for whalers and cod fishermen to go down and keep their dories down there. They had little fish houses and shacks. And in this picture, that's kind of what it looked like. Okay, carry on. So there's a wonderful book that I happen to have down here on the floor called The Early Nantucket and Its Whale Houses by Howard Chandley Foreman. This is not the first edition, but it's a fascinating study of all of the early whaling huts, shacks, cottages here on Front Street and Broadway. And what you have there are a few interesting things there. First of all, there's nothing down below. This is, you see the year up there, 1835. So it's just beach below the bluff. And then you have a road called Highway, which, as you likely know, locals know, there is no highway there anymore. And then you have Front Street. So, and you can see the gullies again. So moving along. I'm just kind of winging this, okay? And Rob is working on the next slide. So, in 1841, actually in the 1830s, there were quite a few major storms that came along the northeast coast of the U.S. And this particular storm, called the storm, occurred in October of 1841. And the description: the ocean roared as though with an unbridled madness, and its waves ran mountain high, throwing their spray far into the sky and forming a majestic yet fearful sight. From Massachusetts' North Shore to Nantucket, many lives were lost, and on the Cape and islands, over 100 bodies were recovered the day after the storm and buried. And at least 190 vessels were wrecked, most being lost at sea. The October gale flooded Nantucket streets, demolished its rope walks, and threw the barns into the sea. Most of these barns were located on the beach below the bank. So that storm officially obliterated any habitation down there on the beach. It's interesting to note, Rob, that 150 years later to the month, we had Hurricane Bob in August, and then we had the no-name storm in October. The no-name or perfect storm, which was a combination of a nor'easter and a hurricane. They kind of settled in over this part of New England. Those storms, they came together, and they stayed for what, 3 or 4 days? And that was the beginning of the end of a number of homes down in Codfish Park. And Rob later will show us some dramatic images, including a video of what happened the next year during the am I in the right century? Yep. The 1992 December nor'easter. So clearly weather has had a significant impact on Codfish Park. There is a history, as we all know, of erosion and accretion, and it sort of feels like we're in an accretion mode right now. We all know that quite a bit of the sand comes down off of Sankaty Bluff and goes upstream and downstream and is carried onto the beaches. And the benefit that Codfish Park has that the Sankaty Bluff does not have is that it's a gradual beach. You'll have winter beaches and summer beaches, but you don't have a huge 90-foot bluff where storms just eat away at the toe of the bluff. So again, we're in a period of accretion, but who knows? Okay, next. Oh, good. These are some old images of Codfish Park before it was called Codfish Park. It really was called Below Bank or Down Bank. Down Bank got sort of had different meanings later on. We'll talk a little bit about that. But these are some wonderful old images. 1885, now I had about 10 pages of presentation on a very important inflection point in the history of Codfish Park. You notice I said had. Earlier this afternoon I started presenting to my 2 co-presenters. One of them went, the other one went. So those notes will stay in a folder, but it was very important. In 1885, Henry Coffin, who was one of the wealthiest Nantucketers who lived in town, I actually have some pictures of him. We'll get to those, okay? He became the owner of the beach down below the bluff. And the condition of his ownership was that he would deed it into a park, a beach park. So I'll tell you a little bit about that, but it's not going to be a long thing because apparently it's not that exciting. This is my favorite image, actually, going down. This is where, this is Middle Gully. I call the lady down there Mrs. Charlie Chaplin, but it's just a classic. You can see some of the fish houses. There were some dwellings down there, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, carry on. Another image from the 1890s, and that's a classic one of the dories or the whaleboats, maybe down on the beach. And well, here we are, Henry Coffin. So settle in. Here we go. This gentleman, along with his brother Charles, owned a whaling ship company in Nantucket, and they had the largest fleet of any company on Nantucket. And at the age of, 1935, you figure out his age, he got married, and he built a little cottage on Main Street. You know, I'm testing you. I'm just constantly testing you. And I'm sure they can edit this for television, right? Can you edit this for television? Where's the camera? Oh, hi. Okay, so back to Henry. So 1834, he got married, and he built a little house on Main Street. Shall we look at that? No, we won't. There it is. 75 Main Street was his cottage, and of course that's typical of many of the grand brick homes on Main Street in town. And Henry wasn't a big person out in Sconset, but he was identified as the person who would set up the deed and trust for the land below the bank. And let's go on to the next one. No, sorry, that's too fast. Okay, so I need to tell you a little bit about him. Let's see. Okay, so in 1886, the Henry Coffin Land Grant and Trust was created and deeded to the proprietors. And the proprietors owned all the open common lands of Nantucket, and they were separate from the town of Nantucket government. And they were kind of special and important. The Bluff Walk up on Baxter was also deeded by William Flagg to the proprietors. But over time, the proprietors kind of went like this, and the town government became much more important. So anyway, he deeded this land to this trust and had 3 trustees, 2 of whom were children, which is typical Nantucket. And then in this trust, there's really one clause that matters. Firstly, the trustees shall allow no building or other obstructions of any kind to be created or maintained on the premises, except bathhouses to be used as such. So, obviously people didn't read the newspaper. It was a little notice in the paper, but that really was sort of the substance of that deed. And it went unnoticed for about 40 years. And then some eager selectmen, and they were all men back then, so selectmen, decided that this wasn't right. There were a lot of people living down there, and that person decided they were squatters. I think you've heard before that folks down on Codfish Park were referred to as squatters. And they went down there and took those little fish houses. We can get rid of that. So this is the end of the story, so I'll be quick. And keep an eye on my centuries, okay? Thank you. So the town government for 60 to 70 years decided this was the biggest issue in Sconset. And they would take a run at it and say, all these people don't own this land, they're not paying taxes, and we need to do something about it. The selectmen would come out to Sconset, they'd walk down on the beach, they'd get winded, and they'd go back to town. And they would say, they don't own the land. What are we going to do about this? Well, the smart folks of Tom Nevers? No, they're smart too. But Codfish Park decided to go to the land court in Boston. And the land court is the final say on deeds for lands. If it's not clear here in the town of Nantucket, you go to the land court. That still happens today. A lot of these smart folks went to the land court. The land court granted them deeds for their little plot of land that had a small cottage on it. And again, the town wasn't really paying attention. So in the late 80s, early 90s, the town said, enough of this. Nobody else can go to the land court. I don't think they had authority to say that. And we're going to take the 14 remaining properties that have houses on them that are not land courted and give them to the town. And we're going to take all the other vacant land. So imagine if you're living there, and some people here this evening were living there during some of this time, and this threat was hanging over you, with the town saying, we're going to basically take over your land. There's a quote I have in here from one of those cheery folks that we'll just skip. So, because I can't find it. I think it was Glidden Sr., who was secretary of the select board, said, you folks only own personal property in Codfish Park. You don't own the land you're on, which in essence was a threat that they were going to kick these folks out. Of course, what do you do with the houses? What do you do with the people? The people said, try it. And the good people of Codfish Park won the day. And this is what happened. In 1993, they started transferring all the roads to the town. They dissolved the trust. Poor Henry Coffin. Actually, I don't think he cares. Henry Coffin was, or is, the great-grandfather of Henry Coffin, III, Robert Skinner Coffin, Mitchell Coffin, and the late Stephanie Coffin, Andrew, who the three boys are still, or two of them are still here in Sconset. So there's a long history in that family. And of course, they're descended from Tristan Coffin. Okay, so let's move on. How we doing, Rob?
Great, I'm just wondering how you're doing.
I'm kind of sweating up here. But other than that, okay, so we know that Sconset morphed after the whaling, the demise of the whaling industry. Sconset morphed into a resort. In fact, a famous resort. And many doctors up and down the East Coast would recommend to their patients that they go, not to Nantucket, but to Sconset for the wonderful summer breezes. They were advocates of swimming in the ocean. Back then, the seaweed was actually lovely. It was long strips of seaweed. It was not red in color. It was a very desirable place to come, and this was one of the hotels early on, the beach house, which eventually almost doubled in size. There was the Ocean View House that was just to the right of that, and the Atlantic House was still struggling along. So it was a destination, and the main beach was just down beyond Codfish Park, not where the beach is today. You would go down Middle Gully, then you'd go down Beach Street, and there was I'm getting some nods here, so I think I'm doing a good job, right? Thank you. I got some yups. I haven't seen any of these yet. But you go ahead and feel free, a boardwalk to walk down to the beach. And if you walk down there today, you'd find a small opening in the grass. But that's where the main beach was, and people called it Main Beach. A lot of the summer folks went down there. So now we're moving into the 30s, and the automobile arrives. So Sconset's getting kind of fancy, but Codfish Park is staying true to its nature. Right, ladies? Yes. And it was charming. And this is, again, the 1930s. Now, if you know Codfish Park today, you know that that white road in the lower part of the photo is Codfish Park Road, and it goes all the way through to where that loop ends, and then it cuts west through Snooky's grandparents' house, which is it still there, Snooky? Snooky, pay attention. Is your house still there? Is your house still there?
Yeah, the house is still there.
The house is still there.
And the fish market was right at the bend in the road.
The fish market? Go ahead.
Fish market was right at the bend in the road. Yeah, up a little more, right there. And then the house was to the left of that, up right as you come down the gully, right in there.
Wonderful.
The house was torn down right after World War II.
After World War II, the house was torn down. Was it smelly down there with the fish house?
No.
No, right. Some people call the smell of fish the smell of money. Okay, so I think that's a wonderful image, and there's another image here. Okay, I'd like to read two passages from two popular histories of Nantucket, and William Stevens wrote a lovely book, and I thought his commentary was sort of had a sociological bent to it, and this one I am going to find, okay? So just bear with me. I'm going to read one first before we get to William Stevens. So, is that good? Is that okay? Joe, nod. Thank you. In May of 1950, there was an article that appeared in the Ink and M, and I don't know who the author was, but it was eloquent and a little bit saucy and interesting. So, could there be anything more interesting than the development of Codfish Park? It is a most entertaining study in village enlargement, which hamlets in the far western mining districts would take off their hats to. No civil engineers have yet been called in. No landscape gardeners have yet been required. No architects of high technique have yet been employed. No highfalutin specialists of any sort have entered into the evolution of the park. Yet each year the newcomer is confronted with, is confronted with remarkable and unexpected changes. This year opens with several cases of slat fences enclosing the adjacent door yards. We also see the handiwork of the house painter in some sections. In other sections may be seen little spots under cultivation for flowers, climbers, and shrubs. We find one or more new mansions completed or in process of construction. Here there is a little touch of special architectural features, and there are to be noted utility and conveniences with any ideas of architectural harmony left out of the question. Before the HTC, of course. Poultry culture is a prominent feature. In the line of town history, it may be stated that Manuel Thomas at number 13 Atlantic Boulevard, which I think was Codfish Road, no, that was further out, I think, owns and occupies the first dwelling ever placed in the park, with his garage at number 9, the same thoroughfare, and it was originally owned by Captain George Coffin as a fish house and was the first building ever erected in the park lands, having been moved from the bank above when nature started to enlarge Sconset's territorial area. Close students of nature find much to entertain them in watching the park panorama, whose every inhabitant appears happy. The only bit of discord that has yet been announced is just a slight feeling of resentment where one has built a new mansion which practically eliminates the western neighbor's ocean view. That, however, is a mere detail with no serious consequences likely to follow. Okay, so I thought that was nice. So let's get to Mr. Stevens, back at the title page. If you had been sent for an extra, no, this is Margaret Fawcett. We'll forget Mr. Stevens, you don't want to hear from him. But I recommend you read the book. You can buy it. There's a edition available, and it's quite entertaining. But Margaret Fawcett, who was famous as a child of the artist colony, her father was very important in the artist colony, wrote a lovely booklet called Sconset Heyday. And she talked, as she lived above bank, she talked about going down. If you had been sent for an extra piece of fish, you wound around the path to the bluff and then the steep incline to Codfish Park, well named, for there spread out on racks and on the roofs of the shacks were the codfish drying in the sun. Nearby were the sheds of Mr. Thomas and Mr. Cash, the reliable and affable fishermen of the village. They would sell you their latest catch, cod, flounder, small succulent sand dabs, or butterfish and blues in season. Almost any day off the Sconset shore, when the fog was not too thick, you could see a line of 4 or 5 dories riding the rollers about a mile out in the open ocean, where the men of the village were anchored on the rip fishing. Okay. So, I'm losing my voice. This is a 1957, and I don't know if this is the most populated time of Codfish Park with buildings. But there's a point where it was fully inhabited, let's say, and they're both looking at me kind of, You're the memory. So there was a point where we had houses on that ocean side, not yet for her, but I got a story about her. So on the ocean side of Codfish Park Road there, you can see many dwellings there. And again, Rob will tell you about what happened to those. Okay, so let's move along. This is Grace Yates as a young girl, Grace Yates. And and she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience in Codfish Park. And we have a video, and we hope it works.
The thoughts that come to mind when I think of Codfish Park are special. They bring back many fond memories and some things I don't remember seeing but have heard and read about, like the fishing boats, the big whaler rowboats that they used to do cod fishing in, and how they would pull them up shore and clean the fish and lay the fish out on the bottom of the boat till it dried. That was one of the things I didn't see, but as I look down now, I could almost see the boats and the men working. After that came the shanties, where the fishermen would bring their families and they could spend the weekends. And finally, and that eventually, I should say, houses were built into cottages that people lived and some still do live in. The other which fascinated me is the bridge. In that years ago they would have to have a long rope bridge to get from the bank to the beach. Now it's still called a footbridge, and it's what you go under to enter our little area of Codfish Park. From all of this came the revolution where people would come to spend summer in Codfish Park, and they were the working class of people who came mainly with the summer people as their maids, chauffeurs, cooks, gardeners, whatever the task may be, there was someone that could do it. And as far as family life, it was one of the best times that I've known. It was just mystical. It was just, I can't tell you how I feel. My mom and dad lived in my grandfather's house for a while. I can remember her taking me and putting her on her lap and looking out the window, and she saw this house and she'd say to me, "You see that house?" She said, "That is what I would love to have someday." Well, they finally got it through the help of a woman that gave them the money, and that's where we lived until in the early 50s. I generally hate the feeling or knowledge of some of the things that are going on, but luckily Codfish Park has not been subject to too much. There is some, but not entirely. And unfortunately, we've had 9 houses go over into the sea because of the erosion. And going back to the old house, it was sad because it was one of the houses that went into the ocean. You just say, only the ocean knows what it holds in store for Codfish Park. I feel, even today, I feel like Codfish Park has a special meaning for me, and it will until the day I die. There's nothing that they can do to it that would hurt it, because I can close my eyes and look out in the distance and see the things that I want to see again. That's it.
That's really lovely. Very sweet. So we've got another video coming up, but I want to just share with you a little bit about the diversification, if you will, of the population in Codfish Park. And somebody did a pretty good job of describing it in writing, so I'm going to read what she wrote, and that's Betsy Tyler, who wrote a brief history about Codfish Park, and she talked about the changes that occurred in the early 20th century, so I'm talking about the 1900s, okay? Good. And this is in Sconset History, which is a wonderful softback book that was published by the NHA, and you can buy it at the NHA. That video was produced by the NHA, and 98% of these slides were produced by the NHA. And when you leave here, there's a table over there, and if you're not a member, you have to become a member. Okay. So moving along, I'm kidding, but they do have membership cards there if you'd like to join. Come on, chuckle. This is Betsy Tyler. In the early 20th century, Codfish Park acquired a unique character as home to many of the working families of Sconset, who frequently served as domestic staff for families in the large houses up bank, or offered other services such as laundry and babysitting help. Others operated businesses of their own in the village. The fascinating and exceptional community was racially and ethnically mixed with families of African American, Cape Verdean, Irish, and many other backgrounds, some from Bermuda. For example, fondly remembered as Mrs. Aries, Mrs. Amos, also known as Linda Aries, who sold freshly baked pies, sweets, hot dogs, and candy from her small store by Middle Gully. Pardon me, candy. These ladies went down to get candy there. And that is, what number Bank Street is that? Eight Bank Street, right, which is a bit in the news these days. Other businesses included John Thomas's Fish Market, John Salvis's Barber Shop before it moved up bank, Lily Malden Mackey's Beauty Parlor, the Venture Inn selling bathing suits and other beach gear. Do you remember any others down there? There were lots of laundresses, because there are some pictures that there are laundry lines all over Codfish Park with the sheets waving in the wind. Living Codfish Park residents recall a cordial, sometimes friendly, sometimes complex relationship with the children from above bank. Codfish Park was a community unto itself, but one with strong ties to Sconset Village, whether through the relationship of work, through gatherings, movies, and shows at the casino, or through the regular bustle and interchange of village life. So, here's a picture, and I can't identify the kids, but we have another slide here. I know that's Jackie Seidel. I believe it's Jackie Seidel. No, it's not. So I'm standing corrected here. It is. Okay. This is your chance to speak into the microphone.
It's Joan Bunting, I'm pretty sure.
Say that one more time.
Joan Bunting,
Got it? Joan Bunting.
I think.
Okay. Thank you. Anyway, I had a wonderful opportunity to talk to Joan Seidel, who grew up in the park, and Jackie. Feel free to correct me, come on. Jackie Seidel. She's a lovely person, and she grew up at probably 10 Beach Street, I think, with a large family and lots of cousins, and her grandparents were across the street. She told me that her uncle, I can't remember which one, she had several uncles, was a lifeguard down here at the main beach in 1943 in July, and he closed the beach because of a shark sighting. So some things aren't necessarily that new. Okay, moving along. So here is a lovely video. The sound is a little difficult to hear because the interview was over the telephone. And the person, I was going to wait until afterwards, but the person who was interviewed here is sitting over here. And I would like to introduce Joan Wilson Godot. Say hi to the crowd. Just say hi to everybody.
Hello.
How long have you lived in?
Pardon me?
How long have you lived in Codfish Park?
My parents bought the house in 1950, and how many years ago is that? A lot, right? I was 4 when I first came to Nantucket, but
Right.
my parents worked on this estate, the Houston estate, and that picture's taken right at the entrance to the help's quarters. They had 2 buildings that the help stayed in.
Good.
And that's where we resided until my parents bought the place in Codfish Park.
Great, so now we'll hear you on the big screen, okay?
In 1938, my father was recommended for a position as a cook and butler for Reagan and Maribel Houston. The recommendation came from the writer Owen Davis and Mrs. Stevens's employment agency, an agency which catered to well-to-do clientele and specialized in matching their clients with highly qualified domestic help. So it was that my father, in accepting that position, traveled with the Houstons to their summer home in Sconset in May of 1938. The Houstons usually stayed from May through October. Consequently, my father was separated from the family during that time because we remained in New York. In 1941, a position for a personal maid became available on the Houston estate, and my father encouraged my mother to apply. She was hired, and in August of 1941, my mother traveled with me to Nantucket. I was 4 years old. It was a long, long ride by train and boat. My sisters remained in New York with my mother's aunt until the summer of 1943, when my parents were able to secure housing for them in Codfish Park at the home of Mrs. Mary Wade. The estate had 2 cottages for domestic help, and my parents and I had one of the 2 cottages exclusively. In 1941 and 1942, my parents hired Hattie Mae Phillips, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. William Phillips, to care for me while they were at work. I guess you could say I had a part-time nanny. I remember my parents working dreadfully long hours, especially when dinner parties and poker parties were held, which lasted well into the wee hours of the morning. I can recall peering through a lattice-work fence, which separated the main estate from the helps' quarters, and watching guests arrive in glorious formal attire for the parties. On the servants' days off, which was Thursday and Sunday afternoon, the family would often visit the many black families residing in Codfish Park. As I recall, Codfish Park was predominantly black, with a small number of white families scattered throughout the area. We all got along. My father was very good friends with Mattie Finnegan and Charlie Handy, and they visited one another frequently. On occasion, racially insensitive remarks were hurled at me, but that was the exception rather than the rule. The most significant contrast for me between Nantucket and New York was the abundance of freedom Nantucket afforded me. By the age of 6, I was pedaling my own bicycle, riding all over Sconset, playing with my friends, Muir Snow, Sally, Sheila, Jackie, and just having fun. Both of my parents were excellent cooks, and all of the family loved to eat. My father, on servants' days off, would organize and prepare all the food for clam bakes. Workers would come from all over Nantucket to swim, eat, and party. I have had, via God's good graces, the distinct pleasure of being able to plant my feet on Nantucket soil every year since the age of 4. My fondest memories of Sconset are the lasting friendships I have formed, singing and dancing in Sconset Square, and performing in the Sconset Theater production of On the Isle. Equally memorable were the ocean swims, which were tantamount to nirvana. Most memorable, however, was the day in 1950 when our family moved into our own house at 32 Codfish Park Road. Most importantly, that event was testimony to the strivings and foresight of our dear parents. Sconset, as well as Nantucket, will always be a part of my soul, for giving me peace, tranquility, and solitude.
That's wonderful. Okay, my time is up, and we're going to hear from Rick Blair, who's looking for pointers from Rob, comparing notes. So you can clap for me now. Thank you. So you're what, Mike?
Well, talk about a tough act to follow. The memories I have of Codfish Park really go back to when I first arrived here. But before I talk about that, practically everybody in here by now knows that Sconset is an Anglicization of a Wampanoag term, which means at the place of the great bones. Because 5,000 years ago or so, when the Algonquin-speaking Wampanoags arrived here, they were alleged, and I guess it's true, to have found thousands and thousands of years of marine mammal bones scattered on the beach here. Well, that's not the only thing that washed up on the beach. In my time here, there's been, let's see, well, before I was here, the oars from the Andrea Doria, one of which is on my friend Kim's wall now. You guys might remember when someone was out in the import-export business and hundreds of bundles of rather suspect-looking green material seemed to have arrived unexpectedly on the shore. Also, I forget the name of the candy. Is it Walthers or anyway? There's an oddball little chewy candy that my friend, the late Pete Fredlin, picked up in buckets and buckets that washed up after a container ship dropped a container of it off of Codfish Park. And what else did we have? Anyway, oh, and a sperm whale, which washed up here. I think it was in 2000. I'm just going to make this really brief, guys, because I know it's warm. But my biggest memories of Codfish Park, and I spent some time living there in the 80s, in what was the smallest house in Sconset. It belonged to a guy named Gene Grimaldi, who some of us know. It was about the size of an SUV, and has since been expanded quite extensively. But the story for me of Codfish Park is really a story of people. When I first came here, it was, as we just mentioned, a largely African-American community and certainly a largely working-class community with wonderful people who would rent their houses out to creative people and artists and hippies. And when I first arrived in Sconset, I was always, up on Main Street and around the restaurant where we worked. And I didn't really realize until I went down to Codfish Park to the beach one day that, wow, this is a whole nother world. And it really was. There were people like Mrs. Malden, Sidonia Morris, Mrs. Fincher, Irene Cash, who owned a number of structures out here. She was a descendant of a whaling captain. Of course, Sally and Sheila's forebearers. A lot of people who were really special. Also, Codfish Park, not to get too edgy about things, was also known for having a few people that were eccentric, even by Sconset standards. There was, for instance, there's a Jackson Street in Codfish Park. And, there's Jackie Seidel's old house right there. That's a real Codfish Park house. And Jackson Street had a number of young men living there. We called them the Jackson Four. And suffice to say, they weren't health nuts. It was that kind of place. And a number of these African-American families would rent to people. It was a really wonderful little community. Here we are. That house today is no longer there. It was taken down last year, and I think, oh, here we are. Did you do the, guys take away the one with the? Yeah, this is Charlie Handy's house, and I'm about to conclude here. This is my memory of Codfish Park. I took this photograph in 1976, and to me, this really captures the spirit of what Codfish Park and really Sconset is all about. It's unpretentious, it's fun-loving, it's a place to let your hair down in a community where in the 70s it was not unusual to tell the president of RCA and his wife how to hitchhike to town to go to dinner at the Opera House. This was the kind of place it was. And those roses, if you look over the bank, some of them are still there. They're refusing to die, but of course those structures are all gone now. And Jackie probably knows a lot more. I'm sorry, Joan probably knows a lot more about that than I do. This particular structure. No. But at any rate, and Rob's going to go to the next slide now, and then that'll be sort of it for me. I took this photograph once again around that same time, and Rob's going to show you in a few minutes some video and photographs of the storm. We already saw the video, I guess, from December of 1992. But the power of the ocean and its sort of connection to the life in Codfish Park is just undeniable. This was the King family house that was on a little lane that was washed away in December, once again, of '92. And about a month later, I was walking my dog down at Tom Nevers on the beach, and I found about 10 beautiful red shutters which had washed up down there, and I took them back and used them to decorate the fence at my house. So I guess the basic conclusion is that Sconset and Codfish Park especially are all about relationships and maintaining respect for one another, and that's always been the story down there, and let's hope it continues that way. Thank you. Oh yeah, I gotta get that through out.
Sheila asked me about the streets, the old names of the streets. And you had a slide here. And there it is. Okay. So these are street names that some of them lasted for a year or two, but none of them are extant. And it's just interesting to see how, well, hairpin curve, I guess, is sort of extant. So do you recognize some of these names? These are from the olden days. Okay. So Rob, are you wired?
I'm wired up.
Okay.
If I'm wired.
So we'll get up to your,
So the whole illusion is being ruined by my, oh, there you are.
wise guy.
Thanks, Bob.
I got his wallet.
Yeah, you do. Donk.
Did I ruin it for you?
Yeah, you completely ruined it.
Sorry.
No, keep, oh, no, there it is. A number of years ago, I was going through some of my grandmother's photographs, and I kept finding pictures of Sconset. Not surprisingly. Jesus.
You need help? Good.
All right, there we go. So I remember looking at this photograph in her little album, you know, with the glued corners and everything, and I'm looking, and it wasn't until about 10 years ago I realized that that's my father and my uncle. Where's the... So anyway, it's definitely Codfish Park, right? And there's my dad there, Robert Benchley Jr. He was probably 2. He was born in 1919, so, and there's Nathaniel Benchley, his brother, my uncle. And since my grandmother probably took the photograph, she carried around the family camera, and she wrote down all the identifications in the negative book and the dates. Unbelievable. And so I don't know whose black shoes those are, but maybe, who knows? Oh, thank you very much. Another picture from my grandmother's album, and I know for a fact that that guy right there is Robert Benchley Jr., my father, and my uncle Nathaniel Goddard Benchley, my uncle. And that right there, according to my grandmother's notes, is Livingston D. Watrous. And they all hung out together in the 20s and the 30s, and they all had a great time. Look at that champ. That's my dad. I had to put that one in there. They all went to the beach of Codfish. It was long before people went to the South Shore. Codfish Park was the place to go. They rented the snuggery up on Evelyn Street. Next. Okay, Bob. Oh, no, sorry, back up.
Okay.
Here we go. We've seen this picture 100 times. Hairpin turn. I have a personal name for it, and I call it Collarbone Hill, because my friend Mike Acton, next. There we go. There's Mike, and Mike lived in the house called All Inn. That was right on adjacent to the sidewalk that went down the main beach. And Mike had a big family. Let's see if I can do this. John, Mike, Connie, Sally, John Sr., I'm missing a couple. Anyway, there were 7 children in the family, plus mom and dad. They all lived in that little house on the corner. 3 bunk beds all over the place. Tommy, thank you. Connie and Judy were the other 2. Anyway,
Oops,
now why are you doing that? Go back.
never mind.
Thank you. So this was 1960, and look at that. That's me. Oh, Collarbone Hill. So Mike Acton was riding his bike down Hairpin Turn, and he put on the brakes on his bike, and he hit a rock at the bottom, went over the handlebars, and broke his collarbone. So he went crying home, and his mom and dad took him up to Doc Slade's house, and Doc Slade was right there on Beach Street, and set his collarbone, and everything was great. Doc Slade was a veterinarian. Okay, next. And that was about 40 years later. Okay. Next. Oh, and this is the Acton house. We talked earlier about the unfortunate demise of Codfish Park in many ways. This is one of them, erosion, and the Actons had to tear their house down because one of the storms had floated it off the foundation, and that's little Tommy Acton. So this was in the 90s. Okay, this is what we like to think of with Codfish Park. It's a nice, calm scene, and then we go into the storm period from in the 90s, the early 90s through the mid-90s. Okay, Bob, next. That's the same angle, it's the same house. That's Harrison Smith's house, Sandpiper. And there was all that beach, and that house is anyway, I call this picture, don't even think of parking here. Okay, next, George Rogers garage. Okay, and that's also from the Smith house. That was 91. I think that was Chris Holland's house. That was 92. Keep going, thank you. This actually was 98. That was the site of the old, there was a bathhouse and a pool there originally. Okay, next, yep, good. Not pleasant. Okay, we can stop there for a second. Just one of your basic Codfish Park fishing shacks floating out to sea. Okay, next. Okay. So this is about 3 minutes long, this video. It speaks for itself. It's George Rogers / Harrison Smith's house.
Harrison Smith's daughter, DeWitt Smith.
It was just beyond belief. We were watching from the second house, just back about 15 feet from where the first house slipped into the ocean. And I just couldn't take my eyes off it. Everything we owned was in the house, and there was just nothing we could do except just watch.
Top of you. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's step back a couple feet here.
Okay. Wave coming up here. So how many decades and decades of life in that house, and all the other ones around it gone in 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So I'm going to wrap this up here, and I just wanted to read you a little something from a book you may or may not have seen. It always wants your number, you know? Here it is. And it's a little thing that in a little book I saw recently called Sconset. It was recently published. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it was from an introduction to Codfish Park. Some of this has already been covered, but we didn't get a chance to go rehearse this. So, okay. Codfish Park is a gem in the crown of Nantucket Island, shining as notably as the rest of Sconset itself. And like the latter, the park represents an example of successions and migrations, both by people and the very sand on which it sits. The American boom of tourism in the 1880s lifted Nantucket out of its previous economic slumps. Sconset benefited as well, and it would put Codfish Park literally on the map. Grand hotels, supper clubs, intentionally quaint developments were built up on the bank. The people who did the work for the new visitors, the cooks, the maids, the domestics, occupied the old fishing shacks and thus created the new Codfish Park. The hotels came and went, but the legacy of the park remains intact with its global representation of African Americans, Bermudians, Portuguese, Azorians, and Cape Verdeans. Today, the ocean keeps nibbling away at the sands it once deposited, leaving an uncertain future of this little jewel. Thank you all.
I'm sure many of you have heard or read that the beach at Sconset has been voted one of the top beaches in the United States of America by Condé Nast with its special red flavor of seaweed. Anyway, thank you all, and it's right at 7 o'clock, so if you need to leave, you can leave, but if you have any questions, let us know, and I'll give the mic to all these folks that grew up there. Any questions? Yes, in the back.
Wonderful presentation, thank you so much. I saw a map once that showed a railroad in Wisconsin. The railroad track was coming from Surfside, and it was on the beach. Anybody know?
You're right. So the depot of the railroad, it ended just where the Gully Road or Brinton Road was. So it kind of had a little bit of it in Codfish Park. But it was definitely the final stop on the railroad. The railroad was there from 1884 to 1917. Did I get the right centuries? Yeah. So, and the railroad at the end failed, but they also sent the steel that they salvaged from the railroad to Europe just in time for World War I to end. It got there about a month too late. But the railroad had its terminus in Sconset below Codfish Park. And good question. Sorry, we didn't mention that.
Where did it go into town?
It went all the way into town on Steamship Wharf. And it went out, it had different routes during its life, but it went out to Surfside and Tom Nevers. There was a stop at the Beach House Hotel just before it got to the terminus in Sconset.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Question back there.
Just to mention, in winter of '97, there were a number of nor'easters, and several Codfish Park houses went out to sea, and the pedestrian bridge was taken out, and some people were able to move their houses out of Codfish Park.
Did you hear that? So 97 was also a bad year for storms, and when some of the houses were moved up bank, they actually took out the footbridge so that they could move them on flatbeds. Anybody else? Thank you to all of these folks, and Paul Judy, the founder of the Sconset Historical Research Group, wasn't here. And I want a special thank you to Joan for joining us. Thank you, Joan. And for our presenters, Rob was reading from his book. Did you know that? Did he hold it up? Where's your book?
I don't know.
Okay, you can get a book from him, the Sconset Pictorial History. It's an excellent book. Okay, thank you, everybody, and there might be some refreshments left over there.